What's going on, guys? Welcome here to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Moradiege, wrapping up to the week this week on today, Friday, with more NFL stories coming to you from the draft, the NFL Draft Combine, and just all the stories coming from a bunch of different sources. We got the Arizona Cardinals and their general manager, what he said in regards to the number 4 overall pick. Then later in the show, I'm going to dive into the NFL and them sort of solidifying more of their NFL rule change proposals and ironing out any sort of doubts and things. They got it all figured out. Now it just takes all the owners and everyone at the meeting to vote on it. That's coming up. Then, on the second half of the show, I'm going to be going into some free agents, some of the best free agents left over, and where I think they'll end up signing, which team fits them best. And then to wrap up the entire show, wrap up the week, Caleb Williams had his pro day a few days ago. I'm going to talk about what he did and some of the reactions that were sparked after his drills and some of the conversations that were had around his performance. All of that coming up on today's episode. And before I get into the chip shot story, as always, I want to remind you guys one time before I start the show to please use the tip and donations link with any questions or comments that you may have. You can use the tip and donations link at gsmcpodcast.net running across the ticker below me. Make sure I can see the question here to my right and I'm able to read it, interact with you guys, have a conversation, maybe even if you guys want to engage more with any of the segments. It's a lot of fun that way, in my opinion, and we always appreciate it here at the network anytime any of you guys are able to do that with your questions. Saying that, I can jump into the first segment, the chip shot story of the day, and revolving around the Arizona Cardinals and what their general manager said recently. There's not too much talk going on right now in terms of trades and player transactions because of how crazy the first week was, obviously. Things have sort of died down. That was supposed to be expected. And now you have more speculation, more guessing, and just questions going forward on, like I mentioned, the rule changes. But where Cardinals general manager Monty Austinfort was asked about that number 4 pick. And it's very intriguing because of the fact that, people after the 4 pick, after the Cardinals select, or really after that top 3 selection, people are going to want to anticipate those picks and want to get their hands on those picks potentially because of all the intrigue around wide receivers, quarterbacks for some teams. So that number 4 pick and even the number 5 pick too, to some extent, basically the same thing there. It's going to be very, very well scouted for, very well touted for. People are going to want their hands on it. And they asked the Cardinals general manager, Monty Austinfort, about it, specifically about trading it or if he's had any conversations around that pick and potentially moving on from it. To which he said, I'd say those phone calls are starting to pick up a little bit. I would say they'll probably continue until next week when we go down to Florida for the owners meeting. But honestly, they probably will not get real until we get right up until the week of the draft, similar to last year. And, that makes sense. There's still pro days going on. Michigan's pro day was today. There was Texas's pro day, Alabama's pro day. All those were going on this week. That's what really made the headlines this week with Caleb Williams as well. I'll get into that later in the show. But, those still have to go on. The official visits still have to happen for some of the higher touted players like the quarterbacks. I'm sure they still have to take the top 30 visits. There has been some other official visits, but all the attention will go to some of the bigger fish in this whole NFL draft, like the quarterbacks, the wide receivers, like I mentioned, especially yesterday coming off of Marvin Harrison not participating in his pro day, going in for an official visit for whatever amount of teams that he has lined up. That's going to be a big part because it is very isolated and it's very personal in how these teams, especially for some of the higher guys in this draft, go about their meetings and what sort of questions they ask them. They really try to get to know the person as well as all the other football stuff. I think those meetings are very important, and it just irons out any sort of little doubts that these general managers, coaches might have about these prospects. The official visits are a good spot to do that. And then, other than that, teams still have to finalize their boards. Obviously goes way further and more in depth than the first couple of rounds. So teams obviously would want to have all of that ironed out and figured out before they get into talking, oh, what happens now if we trade up? What happens if they take this player? They got to figure out which players they're targeting before they can start gauging where they might fall, and they have to identify their needs. And that's the biggest thing for the Cardinals, and I think for Austin Fort, their general manager, talking the way he did and answering the way he did, because this team hasn't been very competitive really in the NFC West. They're not really a contender in any sort of facet that people will want to talk about, but they have some potential there. You can kind of see what they're trying to build under Jonathan Gannon with James Conner. He's a solid running back. Kyler Murray looking better towards the end of the year after suffering that injury that kind of kept him out to start the year. And then you have some players in there. Their defense is looking all right. It could be better, but other than that, they just traded away Rondale Moore as well, so he's gone, and you don't really have too much to work there. So they're a team, much like the top three teams, that could use a lot of stock and a lot of draft capital to help them out a lot more than a lot of people would want to think, instead of just taking the highest available player. So he's still open to it. I am sure that he is well aware of the lack of skill set and ability compared to all the other teams, especially in the NFC, that this team is needing. But as well, at number 4, if you want to break it down, and if you were the Cardinals, if I'm Monty Austin Fort, you want to look at it, and when is the next time you're going to get a Marvin Harrison, a Malik Neighbors, or a Rome Odunze at number 4? You hope not to be there, but when you're there and you're seeing all the players that are available to you, that's very tempting. But, you look at any other teams that would want to trade up that far. It all really depends on what they get back. If they look at this position that they are, how high do they value the 4 pick? A lot of people would want a lot back from it, but with the Cardinals and where you see them at, they might take those 2 first-round picks from the Vikings, and I would probably assume at least the second next year, if not 3 firsts would be a lot, in my opinion. But that, if they offered that, I'm sure the Cardinals would absolutely take that. But I think the 2 first rounds this year and a second round next year could be something that the Vikings could offer, for an example of a team that wants to trade up that far to get a quarterback potentially. The Giants are another one. They sit at 6, but is J.J. McCarthy going to be gone by there? If the Vikings say they jump up and jump over the Giants up to the 4 spot, and they take J.J. McCarthy, and then you're kind of left with Michael Penix, assuming that the first 3 picks are quarterbacks, like most people have them mocked. If the first 3 picks are the quarterbacks, then J.J. goes at 4. The Giants, they had a lot of interest in J.J., it seemed. They brought him in. They gave him a tour of the whole facility. Same with Drake May. They had him in for a visit as well. And those 2 guys could be gone. So how much do you value them and their positioning in the draft? Just 2 spots back. It doesn't seem like that much, but it all depends on who jumps you and who takes that opportunity before you do. And that could be huge as well. The Raiders are another team that are also in need of a quarterback. They sit at 13, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, they sit at 13, and they don't have as much to offer as the Vikings or the Giants even, but could they pull something out? I wouldn't be surprised if they just went all in, but that's up to them and where they see it. If they invest a lot in giving up a lot and trading up in this draft, they have to make sure that this quarterback is their guy. So I think that might be a bit too steep for them to give up so much and move up that far especially. And another sneaky team could be the Broncos, just because they haven't done anything, quite frankly, and they're arguably one of the worst or most trending down team in the NFL right now. They haven't really made any signings. They've had that whole Russell Wilson situation, so they have to still figure things out of where they want to go with this team. And they haven't really done anything at 12. A lot of people have them penciled in for drafting Bo Nix or Michael Penix or someone like that. And that's fine if they really like him, but one of the top, definitely more talented quarterbacks are up there. Again, similar to the Raiders, they're not in a spot right now where I think they can give up too much. They don't have that many assets, so they are there, but you don't really believe it until you figure out what in the world they've given up. And this is all talking about quarterbacks because the Vikings, after they traded for that second first-round pick, a lot of people speculated that they're the number one team to trade up for a quarterback at 4. But who's to say, somebody doesn't beat them out because they want a better receiver? What if the Jets or the Bears at number 9 trade back up a little bit because they want to make sure they get a great wide receiver for Caleb Williams if you're the Bears, or another wide receiver for Aaron Rodgers if you're the New York Jets trading up from 10. So if they jump up to 4 and jump the Giants and they jump the Los Angeles Chargers, how does that all switch up? It's not just the value around quarterbacks. A lot of teams are looking to jump up potentially for another receiver or another playmaker because those guys are so talented and they've been hyped up so much. Teams just in that area in the top 10 could all mostly use a wide receiver or a quarterback, and just outside the top 10. So it'll be interesting to see who actually goes up to the Cardinals and offers maybe the most, or offers it first and just continues to be on them about this trade. All of that, those little nuances and those little details don't really don't gain as much attention in storylines and just how important those are behind the scenes. But it just drops on you, and then everyone's scrambling to figure out how did it get to this point. And I think that's very interesting in how it all develops. And just on the last thing I'll say about this is that the Cardinals, in my opinion, are sort of doing it the right way because of how their general manager is really orchestrating their process. He's saying that it's intriguing. He's saying that he's open to it, but he's going to most likely wait. When he said it's probably not going to get real until the week right up to the NFL draft. So if you want to compare it to how the Bears handled their whole Justin Fields situation, you can look at that and think that they went a little bit too early and just took whatever deal just to get him off their books. Comparing those two situations, I think the Cardinals are doing better than what the Bears did with Justin Fields because of the fact that they've come out and they've said, we're not really entertaining anything until the week up to the draft, because they know, like most people do anticipate, anything can happen in these next few weeks. And because of that, a lot of scenarios will change. Someone could sign a big free agent, then they don't need to trade. Someone could make another trade for another player, and then that situation's fixed. You don't really know what's going to happen until draft night, quite honestly, where people are really settled in to know what they want to do. And I think the Cardinals are handling it very well. They're orchestrating this very well, keeping teams on their toes a little bit. I'm sure they're not going to show their cards that much until the week of it. I think Monty Austinfort is doing a great job of that. And I just think if I were to pick a team to trade, I think it would be the Cardinals. Not so much the Chargers, because I think they'd allow someone to trade to number 4, take a wide receiver, and then I think they'd be happy with Odunze, Neighbors, or Harrison, whoever's going to get picked at 4. Or maybe they get lucky and the Vikings trade up to 4 and get a quarterback, and they still can get whatever wide receiver they like. So between those two, I think the Chargers aren't really needing of a trade. Their general manager has said they're open to it, but really I don't think they'll end up moving. I think more people will want to reassure their team and move up to 4 and make sure they get that receiver or quarterback that could potentially change their team for the better going forward. We shall see how that plays out. But I'll be moving on to the next topic now. We'll put a pin in that, and I'm sure we'll revisit that later on. But for now, we'll head into the first break of the show. And after that break, I'm going to jump into the details surrounding the NFL rule change proposals. They've been ironed out. they've become a bit more specific, and I want to get into all of those, as well as free agent fits with all the remaining free agents left on the market, and my takeaways from Caleb Williams' pro day a few days ago. All of that, all the details coming up on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.